The ds-incubator continues on the series about Docker containers, and today we are going to be talking about how to manage them. The start of the show is going to be a command called docker ps. The objectives are the following. So first, we're going to see how to run persistent containers as opposed to ephemeral containers, which is what we have been working with so far most of the time. Also, we're going to use this start command docker ps to list the containers, to view them, and also to pay attention to what status they are in. And also we're going to be using commands to stop, start, and attach containers, and to remove containers. So first we're going to be working with just one container at a time, but in real life many times we end up with a bunch of containers that kind of accumulate as we work, and when we are ready with them and we don't need them anymore, it's useful to know how to do operations in batch, how to, for example, stop multiple containers at once, and how to remove multiple containers at once. So that's the idea for today. I'm gonna be first, mostly using this one command from the home page of the Rocker project. It is, a command that will start a container with R. What this container does is not interesting for the purposes of today. Today is mostly how to actually manage containers, whatever they do. And I forgot to kind of mention that today we are kind of starting part 2 of the series. Part 1 was like the minimum that you could probably need to use containers, and now we're moving to this stage where we're getting a little bit more technical, and we're talking about managing them. For a lot of people that are just interested in using images that other people build, maybe what we have seen so far is enough. Today we get into a topic that is more, okay, if you're hanging out with Docker containers for a bit, then you will need to kind of remove the stuff that you have hanging in there so that it doesn't take up space, right? So that's the goal of that I'm trying to address today. So let's go to a terminal and let's just paste that command. Before we used ephemeral containers, which we told Docker to do that just by adding this flag --remove rm. But we're going to remove that remove flag because today I want to show you persistent containers, which is actually the default behavior of the docker run command. So this is the first container I'm going to run. As you can see now, it is running an R session. So if I pop up another terminal and type that start command that I mentioned, docker ps for processes, I can see this table, which shows me that there has been something which status is, there's a container which status is up, and it has been running for 12 seconds so far. It is running R, and it was created just at the time, like just a moment before it started running, because there's first step where we create a container and then the step when we actually run it. But the docker run command does the two things at the same time. And Docker gave it a name, so we can refer to it to do a bunch of things. For example, we can use that name to stop the container. So we knew from previous times that we can stop a container. In this case, for example, just by reading what we see on screen, we can exit this R session with quit, with Q, --. But and also we could do it with Control D. But now, just to show you the more general approach to stopping a container, I'm going to type docker stop. So if you are curious about what other commands Docker provides, remember that you can always do docker help, and you will see all the options that are available to you, including, for example, the docker stop command that we are about to type. So let's do that, docker ps, to see which containers we have, and to learn the name. It's called learn grade something. So I'm gonna type docker stop grade. I don't need to type the whole thing, because as I do, there is autocomplete. I could do tab and complete the name that is otherwise maybe hard to type. It's going to take a little while because we are shutting down a computer here, and I'm sure that a lot of you have that experience. When you shut a computer, there's a lot of processes that need to finish, need some little time to finish. and then they are done. So we are done now. So if we do the docker ps command again, the table that we see should be empty, and it is. So now we have learned, how to run a persistent container, how to stop a persistent container, and let's see what else we have appointed for today. Okay, we learned how to view the status. So now let me show you what else we could do with docker ps and other docker commands in terms of management. So we stopped this container, but if we pay attention to the docker ps help file, also remember that Docker has a very nice reference, so you can go to the reference and look for the Docker ps reference online. But here on the terminal, we can get enough information for now. Let me clear this console with Control L and do the help file again. I want to right now draw your attention to this one flag, the all, which shows all the containers that you have in your system, not just the ones that are shown by default, which are those that are the ones that are running. So if we stop a container, that container is no longer running, but maybe still hanging out in our system. So let's do docker ps -a, and here you see that I have actually a bunch of containers, maybe containers that I have from my experiments before I started this meetup, and they all show not the status up, they show the status exited. And here it is, the container that we stopped just a moment ago. Let me go back to the screen where I see your faces, because I hear a bing, meaning that there is a comment or question. Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, if we could just jump back to the console here.
Yeah.
I think it would be useful to clarify the distinction between a container and an image. So previously we've used the analogy of using Docker is very similar to sending a computer device to someone via like a FedEx envelope, right? So that's not entirely accurate. The container is a specific instance of an image. So imagine the image is like the hard drive of the computer. If you have the hard drive and you plug it into a computer that has a processor and a monitor, then it is functional. So, but the image, the hard drive, right, is not entirely functional on its own. It needs an environment, it needs a processor in order to work. So an image plus that is being executed is the container. And you can have multiple containers from the same image here. As we can see, like all three of these containers come from the same RBase image. So ultimately what I'm trying to get at here is these are multiple parallel computers that are all set up and started identically, but in the 2 to 14 minutes since they have started running, they have been doing different things. That is the difference between a container and an image. Is a container is a specific image being executed in a particular way.
Thanks, Alex. I hope that also will be a great introduction for when we discuss how this idea of managing containers extends to managing images as well, which I don't think I'm going to have time to cover today, but the tools that we're learning today, or some of the tools that we're learning today, actually I'm going to be showing in a moment, will be also useful to for images, which is the idea of particularly of working with multiple images at once. Sometimes you want to remove a bunch of images at once, and the ideas that we're going to be presenting today to do that with containers do apply for images as well. So so we learned how to stop a container. So if there is a Docker command, a Docker stop command, very likely there is a Docker start command, right? So if we are going to be using these persistent containers and we are able to run them and then stop them, then we should also learn how to restart them and then how to actually continue using them, right? So let's do that with a container that we created for this meetup, which is this one here, the Great Leatherberg. So I'm gonna do Docker start that container. I'm gonna just type a few keystrokes and hit tab. That prints the name of the container, and then if I do a Docker PS A again, I can see that that one is now up before it was exited, sorry, here, and the other two continue to be exited. So the container is running, right? But we don't see the output that we expected. You know, the first time that we ran the Docker run, it created the container, it started the container, and it did something else, which is to attach the R session to the front of the terminal where we are actually interacting with the computer, right? So what's missing here is the attach stage. So what we need to do is, of course, type Docker attach. And in this case, you know, again, we type a few keystrokes, hit tab, and we're going to attach, in this case, that that session that of R is now attached to my terminal, so I can do something like 1+1, and as we are used to experiencing in R, you know, we get the output right there. So we learn how to run stuff that stays in our computers, how to stop containers, how to reattach them. So one thing we could do now is to stop it again and then remove it. So one actually, you know, once I have, as I have now one container that is running and two that are exited, I would like to show you actually one quick way to work with multiple containers at once, which is the idea when you want to remove them. The default command docker remove, the docker rm, will remove only the ones that are exited and not the ones that are up. So actually I'm going to use that as a way to show I'm now exiting R with Q and then saying that I don't want to save the workspace of that session. So what I'm going to type now is docker remove. But Docker remove takes a single argument, which is the name of one container. So I'm going to choose this one, for example, the last one. So I'm going to type Docker remove charming, right? And now if I do a Docker PS A again, what I expect to see is that these two containers remain, but this one here is gone because I actually removed it with Docker rm. So let's see if that is true. Oops, I did Docker PS -A. That is true. So effectively, I removed one container and the other two are still hanging in there. So one way in which you can now work with multiple containers at once is first, you need a way to tell Docker which are the specific containers that you want to work with. And one very useful flag to Docker PS that allows us to do that is the -q flag. And that flag is very useful to learn because it's available in many Docker commands. So when you're querying for images, you can also have that flag. When you're querying for volumes, you also have that flag. That will make sense when we explain what the images are or show examples and volumes. But for now, know that this quiet flag is very useful. And instead of printing the whole table that you saw before, let me do it again, it prints just the IDs, which is a very good way to refer very specifically to the containers that you want to work with. So right now, for example, if I wanted to say that I want to remove all containers, I can use these two identifiers and pass each of those identifiers, each of those in an iteration mode, to the command docker remove. So how would you do that? Okay, one way in which you'll see it a lot on the Docker documentation is with this. You just wrap the command that you want to be kind of repeated for each call to Docker remove in this case, or to whatever other command that you pass. For example, if I do an echo of this, what I get is the two identifiers of the containers, right? So if I now replace the echo by docker remove, you would be passing each of those as an argument to docker remove, meaning that you will have effectively removed the two containers at once. So it is useful because sometimes, as said before, you end up with 20 containers that you don't need anymore, and you want to kind of clean them all at once. One interesting property of docker remove is that if you have one container that is up, it won't remove it. So you can, if you're interested in removing everything except the 2 or 3 that you're working with right now, you can just keep them running and then do docker remove, and by default, everything that is exited will be gone, and the one that is still running will stay. If you want to remove everything, including the ones that are actually running, then you can use the flag force. So docker remove help will help you learn and refresh your memory. So the force flag will remove every single container in a kind of hardcore way, because it won't give them a lot of time to kind of shut down properly. So I don't recommend it at all. All right, so let me see where we are at. I think I want to cover one more thing. Okay, we learned how to remove containers in batch. And now let me kind of show off one property of Docker Compose, which is a tool that we have been also talking about quite a bit in this series. So for that, I'm going to check out, I'm going to move to my to the repo that hosts this series. In particular, I'm going to go to this particular folder that is the folder of the day. Here I have a file, there's a Docker Compose, and as you remember, if you do from previous meetups, you can start whatever that Docker Compose file describes, the environment, the computer environment that Docker Compose file describes, with Docker Compose app, whatever that is. So I took some time there to create a computing environment that contains 2 containers. So I'm gonna do Docker Compose app. That will do its little magic, and as you can see already, this created not just 1 but 2 containers. One is called RStudio user, and the other one is called root admin. So if I go to another terminal to kind of learn what I have just done, I can see, remember that we have the docker ps command, right? And that lists containers, but it would also list a container. For example, if I created docker create, in the meantime, I kind of show us this new command, docker create, creates a container but doesn't run it. So let's do that. So if I do a docker ps, you will see docker ps -a, sorry, you will see 3 containers here. Let me clear the console up to avoid confusion. I acknowledge we are at the 20 past. I'm going to be stopping very, very soon. So the vanilla docker ps command shows all containers in my system. But because I am in the directory that contains that Docker Compose file, then Docker Compose will be aware of that is the environment that I'm actually trying to work with. So I can do Docker Compose PS, and that will give me only the status of the containers that I'm working with right now. So this Docker Compose is a great tool to work with multiple containers at once for a specific environment that you describe in that file. And not only you can create all those containers at once just with calling Docker Compose, but you can also do something like Docker Compose down, and that will stop the containers and then remove them. Right now we are at the stage where they are being stopped, and then after that they are removed. So if we now did Docker Compose PS again, we could see that they are gone, right? So another way to then work with multiple containers at once, all for for a related task, is with Docker Compose. If we haven't covered here, and we want in this series to create Docker Compose files, but if someone created Docker Compose file for you, then that's nice, because then you can run them all, close them all, stop them all, and remove them all in a very easy way. So by the way, of course, if I do a docker ps -a, I can still see the container that we created outside, that is general for my system, that doesn't relate to the environment that is described in this Docker Compose file that I have here. Okay, with that, I covered what I intended to cover today, and we still have 8 minutes to, fill the gaps that I may have left in this session, and also to ask questions and try to answer them. Go ahead. If we do have the few more minutes with no questions, then I'm gonna show how to actually manage images, which could be, actually what I didn't show today is the Docker filter, the Docker PS filter. That could be very useful. So let's go back to a vanilla terminal, and let's do a Docker. Let's create a bunch of containers here and here. Let's do a Docker ps -a. So here we have 3 containers. Actually, let's start one of them, the silly one, and do a Docker ps -a again. So now we have this situation where we have one container that is running and 2 that are created, and let's stop one. Well, this should work. So what I wanted to show is this flag from the Docker ps command that is very useful now and will be very useful also, particularly when we work with images, particularly to solve the problem that is called the dangling images. So that flag allows us to filter that table for specific things. For example, let's do the Docker ps again. I can use the status as one criteria to filter the containers. So say that I want to remove all containers that have been created, or I want to start them all. One thing I could do is Docker ps filter, and now I can do status created. So that will give me the table, but filter for just those containers, right? And now with the flag -q, remember that we can get the IDs of those containers, meaning that now we are very close to being able to run something like Docker start on all of them and start all these multiple containers at once. To do so, before I show you something like this, Docker start like that. And that's okay, that's the way you would, see this written in just about any documentation about Docker. But honestly, I prefer a different syntax because I find it easier to build commands incrementally. So if I have been, first I type Docker ps, then I press the up arrow key to recover the last command that I typed, and then I extend that command with, filter status created -q. I'm in this situation. So what I like to do instead, to iterate over each of those IDs, is to just extend this command with a pipe into a command called xargs, which all it does is takes each of those values from the left-hand side of the pipe and puts them all the way to the right-hand side. So it's very similar to the pipe that you might be familiar with in R. So now I could do something like Docker start, for example. I don't need to do anything here. Automatically, xargs is going to be moving all of those things and put them there to the right and execute that. So that's the way I like working with Docker, with multiple containers or images or volumes or whatever you want to do at once. I like to use that pipe and xargs command a lot. So for example, now I have them all up. So if I wanted to stop them all, I would do Docker ps -q to show all the IDs, and then I could do xargs Docker stop. And if I wanted to remove them all, I would now be able to do the same thing, but remove stop and replace that for rm. Let's wait until they all shut down. So now I could do something like this, rm, and that would be removing those containers. Docker remove one more containers, usage I'm missing something. Docker PS. Okay, it looks like they're gone already. Okay, that was a little bit of an extension of what I wanted to show today, to show how to filter the table that you get from Docker PS with that flag filter, which is going to be very useful again and again when we want to filter images and volumes when we cover them. Any new thoughts or comments from this last section or anything? Alex, go ahead.
Just that even if you don't use Docker containers super regularly, this is a good thing to sort of keep in the back of your mind and be able to find how to do this later. Because Docker will basically partition off a little chunk of your hard drive, and you get to control how big that partition is. But if that ever fills up, you're going to start running into errors when you use Docker. And if you start running into those errors, a good first step is to go through, clean out any images, clean out any containers that you haven't been using in a while. That often resolves most of my problems with Docker.
Right. Thanks. So maybe just in words to recap what we've seen, we learned how to run containers that persist in our system simply by default, but not using the flag -- remove. We learned how to do things like create containers with Docker create, stop containers with Docker stop, restart containers with Docker start, attach containers with Docker attach. And more than anything, we've typed a lot Docker PS, which is Docker processes, and the flag -A is very useful to see all containers, not just the ones that are running. And we also learned that there is this useful flag -Q that that transforms all that table into just a list of IDs of the containers, and that is what we need as an argument to other commands like Docker, for example, stop if we want to stop multiple containers at once, or Docker remove if we want to remove multiple containers at once. So the flag A, the flag Q, and also the flag -F or filter is also very useful. The filter in particular allows us, for example, to filter containers by status. We can say status equals exited or status equals running, and we would get only those particular containers. Then combined with the -Q flag, we get the IDs, and then we can iterate over each of those IDs and do things in batch. And finally, I also show how Docker Compose does a lot of this work very nicely by describing the environment that you want to work with. That environment may have more than one container, and whatever you do with Docker Compose is going to be applied by default to all the containers at once. For example, starting them all with Docker Compose up, and stopping them all and removing them all with Docker Compose down. With that, we wrap today's session. We don't have too many meetups ahead. I think with one or maybe two, we should be able to wrap this series and then move on to another one. So start thinking about the topics that you want for the next session. Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Ciao, ciao.